in terms of our needs when it comes to energy and food security, but also the need to rethink different things that we have taken for granted for a long time, whether we're talking North-South relations, East-West relations, globalization, equity, but of course not least, and so very importantly, we're also talking about questions of technologies and future production systems as well. So today we're really glad to be co-hosting this event with our partner Marfrig here. And today what we will do is we will start with a couple of keynotes, and then we will have a panel discussion where we will also thereafter invite some audience participation. And then after that, there will be a reception, which is of course the most exciting thing that is standing in that to be expected upstairs. But before I let you get on with the rest of the excitement, we sort of should say that by the time, I will explain again when we actually have the Zoom, what will happen. The event is bilingual, so if you need, you should have the translation toolkits around you so that you can make sure that, and for me, it is a relative challenge as always to try and balance. I mean, I'm unfortunately very not bilingual on this occasion. And not only that, and I apologize in advance to all our speakers as well, that I will likely murder their name as well, because my excellent pronunciation wouldn't go unnoticed by them. But today what we will do, as I said, is we'll start off with a couple of keynotes, and then we will start with Marcela Molina to start with, who's a member of the Sustainability Committee of Marfrig. And obviously, we are very honored actually to have the perspective from, in fact, today we were complaining, not us. I was complaining with someone else about another meeting I was in earlier, that we never had enough of the next generation perspective. So we thought that as a change, we'll start with the next generation perspective. But Marcela, why don't you kick us off, please?
Thank you.
Whatever you like, you can sit down, you can stand up, whatever you like.
Okay.
Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor being here today. I am Marcela Molina from Marfrig. First of all, I would like to thank Chatham House for hosting this important discussion in behalf of Marfrig Group and my family for the transformation of food systems for a sustainable future. For us, Marfrig, sustainability started back in 2009, when we signed a public commitment with Greenpeace for deforestation free in our supply chain in Amazon. In 2010, we launched a geo-monitoring satellite platform. Fast forward to 2018, we established a partnership with Embrapa for carbon neutral and low carbon beef protocol. In 2019, my father created the Sustainability Committee within the company. And 1 year later, he invited me to join. Because when I was little, I was asking to my father, what we are doing about the discussions that is happening around the world? What can we change on our production? Allowing me to closely witness and actively participate in all the ongoing activities. During my 2 years in the committee, I'm very proud that we achieved the inclusion of over 300 producers in our supply chain that now are doing right in the standards of the market and Marfrig, and the implementation of the low carbon livestock. In 2022, we closed 100% traceability of our direct suppliers. And more recently, we closed 74% of Cerrado region in our indirect suppliers and 80% of our indirect suppliers in the Amazon region. Our program, Marfrig Green Plus, that was launched in 2020, is lays on 3 pillars: technical assistance, financial mechanisms, and traceability. We need to produce, conserve, and include is the key to meeting the demands of tomorrow's consumers. Marfrig is ranked and is globally recognized as the top-rated beef company in major sustainability rankings, such as FAIR, CDB, and BBFOL. This recognition shows that Marfrig is in the right track and is sustainability reference, not only in Brazil, but worldwide. As part of the next generation, I am committed to continue all the hard work Marfrig has been doing in the field of sustainability and intellecting climate change. It is important to ensure the continuity of this responsible action, which reconciles food production and nature protection. To conclude, I would like to extend my sincere thanks for each and every one of you. I would also like to thank Minister Isabela Teixeira, Roberto Wacchi, Marcelo Furtado, and Ana Young, and Professor Walter from the University of Columbia, and our Sustainability Director, Paulo Pianese. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcela. I think that, we often talk about how dangerous it is for some CEOs who are not going to be around to be making commitments well into the future. So for a change, we have someone who probably will certainly outlast me, but also more likely than not, but also have a commitment that is actually really near term, which is 2025, Brazilian Marathon 2030. So I think that is really a good start to our discussion today. So with that, I would like to also ask now Jorge Viana, who is the president of the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency as well, to join us to give his keynote. We heard about the recalibration, we heard about the commitments, and we also know that, you would know more than all of us, that trade is nowadays often a dirty word in many parts of the world because it means giving in control to other people. So I think, we now hear that Brazil is back. Obviously, Marfrig as well is a very export-oriented company as well. So it'll be really important to hear your perspective in terms of the challenges, in terms of delivering these commitments, both in terms of trade as well as obviously zero deforestation as well for Brazil. Thank you, Jorge.
Então, eu cumprimento a todas e todos, quero dar abraço especial, renovar minha admiração pela Marcela, que acaba de fazer uma ótima, curtíssima e objetiva exposição, cheia de conteúdo. Agradecer a senhora Ana e ao diretor executivo da Chatham House e por essa oportunidade que estamos tendo. Eu estou diretamente aqui em Brasília e queria rapidamente... Acabei de chegar do Itamaraty, onde participava de um seminário sobre África, né? E eu falava que estamos num mundo que vive múltiplos desafios, crises, emergências, como a climática, que é talvez a mais ampla de todas, que compromete a vida no planeta. Mas não é só isso, as desigualdades, né, que nós temos, a escassez de água para alguns, de alimentos para outros, a transição energética. E, no meio de tudo isso, nós temos que ver como podemos fazer o mundo chegar na zona de segurança, sair da insegurança para a área de segurança. E penso que seminários como esse, encontros como esse, podem ajudar bastante, né? Nós estamos aqui falando, por exemplo, de um setor responsável pela alimentação de uma boa parte do planeta. E o Brasil é o segundo país, atrás dos Estados Unidos e da União Europeia, com condições de ampliar a sua participação na oferta e buscando a segurança alimentar. Eu acho que é muito importante que todos entendam que o Brasil está passando por uma outra mudança novamente agora, né? Nós tínhamos um país, um governo, que era parte do problema e não era parte da solução. O desmatamento no Brasil estava aumentando nos últimos anos, as invasões de terra estavam aumentando e esse tipo de política estava contaminando algo que é muito rico para todos nós e que é motivo de orgulho nacional, que é a produção da agropecuária, do agronegócio, da produção familiar. Agora, a mudança veio de uma forma muito forte O atual governo trabalha para reduzir o desmatamento e acabar com o desmatamento ilegal. O atual governo atua para conservar e para garantir os direitos das populações indígenas. E, ao mesmo tempo, o atual governo trabalha para que a gente possa ter um crescimento maior ainda da produção sustentável no Brasil. Acho que isso está muito em consonância com o novo padrão de produção e consumo no mundo. O consumidor mudou também. E é bom que o Brasil construa uma narrativa comum, e é isso que nós estamos fazendo, tentando envolver empresas, né, produtores e também governo, para que o mundo entenda que o Brasil é parte da solução. O Brasil, por exemplo, nós temos um rebanho de quase 220 milhões de bovinos, né, para uma população um pouco menor ainda, e 80% desse rebanho vive em pasto, completamente diferente da Europa. Para a Europa, talvez, em alguns aspectos, seja mais fácil. Você tem um clima, né, como tem parecido nos Estados Unidos, outro grande produtor, mas no Brasil é um país tropical. Né? Aqui nós temos guardadores da biodiversidade, nós estamos guardadores da água doce do planeta, mas nós também temos condição de ampliar muito a nossa produção. Esse rebanho bovino, por exemplo, ele ocupa perto de 160 milhões de hectares. E o Brasil, nos últimos 30 anos, ele reduziu o uso de terra para a pecuária em mais de 100%, 109%. E, ao mesmo tempo, ele cresceu a produção agropecuária em mais de 100% e reduziu em 15% o uso de terra, de área. Se o Brasil não tivesse adotado tecnologia, se os produtores não tivessem avançado na sustentabilidade, o Brasil tinha que ter, para um modelo antigo, perto de 300 milhões de hectares só para a pecuária. Então, o Brasil é um país que, pelo que já avançou, seja pela Embrapa, pelo trabalho feito nos centros de conhecimento e, principalmente, pelo trabalho feito por quem cria, quem planta, quem produz, o Brasil tem hoje condição de passar um exemplo para o mundo de um país que vai dobrar sua produção agropecuária, vai dobrar a produção de carne, usando menos áreas e ampliando a produção de grãos, por exemplo. A safra brasileira deve chegar agora a 300 milhões de toneladas. A produção de carne, agora, como falou a Marcela, está muito preocupada com rastreabilidade. Né? Isso é um compromisso também dos produtores agropecuários brasileiros, das indústrias do agronegócio brasileiro. E obviamente, de ser parte da solução para que nós possamos pôr freio na mudança climática. Então, eu queria concluir, dizer que a Apex, que é a agência brasileira que promove as exportações, que promove as empresas brasileiras no mundo e atrai investimento, está focada nesse compromisso, né, de ESG e, especialmente, de garantir que os produtos brasileiros, quando oferecidos mundo afora, venham com o selo da sustentabilidade. E acho que um seminário como esse é fundamental, porque eu conheço a família que hoje dirige a Marfrig, construi a Marfrig, esse compromisso deles é um exemplo, e o exemplo arrasta. Eu acredito, sinceramente, com o governo do presidente Lula e Geraldo Alckmin, com o trabalho que estamos fazendo também aqui na Apex, nós vamos construir um selo mundial que possa dar garantia para que os consumidores entendam que o Brasil, sendo um país tropical, com tantas dificuldades a serem superadas na produção pecuária, tem responsabilidade com o cenário que o mundo vive hoje, e especialmente a responsabilidade de fazer o mundo avançar muito na ideia de suprir as crises, as inseguranças, como alimentar, por exemplo, e a crise climática. E acho que isso vai vir certamente a partir da ação mais forte do Brasil, da presença mais forte. Mas, para isso, temos que ter a confiança do mundo, a confiança da União Europeia de que o Brasil está fazendo a sua parte e vai avançar muito mais na agenda de sustentabilidade. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Georgia. I think that recently trust is often a topic that comes up in international relations, but perhaps very importantly, I sort of just had lunch actually with a colleague earlier who would literally shudder at the prospect of increased livestock production anywhere in the world. So in some sense, the burden of proof is pretty high when it comes to trust, which is why I'm honored and glad that we have a panel right now to talk through some of these challenges as well that we're going to face today. So if I may invite the panel to join us as well, and thank you, Georgia, for your keynote remarks. And thank you very much, Marcella. If I may invite the panel to join us, if I understand on stage, so that we will have 30 minutes of a discussion followed by some question as well. I mean, if in doubt, just to be clear that I'm just following orders here. So, in case it wasn't clear. I mean, we just heard some very exciting prospect here just now in terms of the potential to produce sustainably, but also bring different types of, obviously trade and other and nutrition opportunities as well. But at the same time, we know that the situation is often complex. That there will be a sort of nice way of putting complexity to describe what it is. So today we have a couple of panelists who are extraordinarily well qualified, all of which will, excuse me for introducing their credential only very briefly in terms of the title, so that we can get straight to the substance as well. I mean, who will start us off right now is Wouter Betjen, who is Senior Research Scientist at the Climate School in Columbia University, who will kick us off with a bit on the science side in terms of where we are, in terms of research, some of the research findings on food systems transformation. So I understand that you also lead on the sustainable healthy diet piece of the network of the Climate School, which is an enormously ambitious and exciting undertaking at Columbia University around, obviously not just today's knowledge, but also tomorrow's generation as well. Why don't I pass it to you?
Sure. Thank you very much for the invitation. Good afternoon, everybody. So, in discussing sustainability of food systems, and especially in this audience, one of the food systems that is receiving, or component of the food system that is receiving a lot of attention is livestock production system, clearly. And the first concept that I would like to say is that there is not such a thing as a livestock production system. There are many different livestock production systems, some of which are completely unsustainable, and some of which are completely sustainable. And especially when you talk to audiences that are not very familiar with agriculture production systems, people tend to put livestock production system like one homogeneous thing, which is not right. Nobody will discuss that a production system that is based on deforestation, burning a tropical forest, then planting a pasture, then raising cattle. There's no way to defend that as being sustainable. But they're production systems that are based on natural ecosystems, grasslands, that have had herbivores grazing for 8 million years at least, part of the equilibrium. They are sustainable. So, point one, there is not a livestock production system. Point two, we are very worried about greenhouse gas emissions. We are getting to really dangerous situation regarding emissions, regarding climate change. And in food systems, there's lots to be done, a lot, particularly in livestock production systems. But if we're really worried about climate change, if we're really worried about greenhouse gas emissions, let's not get distracted. 75% of the greenhouse gas emissions are still coming from fossil fuels. So yes, there's a lot we can do in food systems, there's a lot we can do in livestock production systems, but let's not get too distracted. And the third message, the third concept, is a word of caution when giving messages that are intended for global audiences, and that sometimes I find them very north-centric. One example is the world should eat less meat, less animal protein. That message makes a lot of sense for a country like the United States, where people are eating 120 kilos of meat per year per capita. That's a lot. That message does not make any sense in sub-Saharan African countries, in Ethiopia, where people are eating 10 kilos per capita per year, and where high nutrient food is very necessary to combat problems of food security and nutrition. So those are the three messages that I wanted to leave with you. One, there is not one livestock production system. There's some that are sustainable, some that are not. Two, lots to do with greenhouse gases, emissions, climate change in food systems, but let's not get distracted. And three, let's be careful when we send messages to the world that are too north-centered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter. I think that some people might say that it's not a question of distraction, it's about we're in a world where we have to tackle sources of all emissions. And therefore, I think it's important to remind ourselves of that as well. We can come back to that in a bit, if you like. Now that we've heard some of the sort of thinking behind the sort of food system and transformation science as well, I thought it's a good time for us to go to Louis Chamarau as well, who's the CEO of Science Based Targets Initiative. Now, we talked about trust already. In many ways, it is about our ability to prove that indeed what you say you're doing is being done. So, of course, very important verifiers and intermediaries in some ways, like SBTi, is a big part of it. So, Luis, would you like to share your thoughts with us, please?
Well, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be part of this panel, to be joined by such distinguished fellows. Pleasure to meet some of you. Great to re-see some of you as well. And thanks for the invitation. I'm so sorry that I cannot be there today. So I'll try to have a very brief introduction on three things. First up, what is SBTi? Why we do what we do? And finally, a little bit of the reflections around what does it mean for food systems in general and Brazil specifically. So I'm Luis, I'm the CEO of the Science Based Targets Initiative. We're a global standard setter that defines what good corporate climate ambition looks like. Basically, we do two things. We define the standards, the rules of the game, and we validate if companies adhere to those standards when it comes to their corporate climate ambition. I joined the initiative about a year and 4 months ago. When I joined, there were 2,000 companies in the world that had committed to set those targets, out of which half of them had already set those targets, about 1,000. 1 year and 4 months later, we're now at 5,000 companies with commitments globally, 2,700 which have already set commitments. So we more than doubled in size for the third year in a row. So what started as a ripple is now really a wave. And if you look at what's coming behind that wave, I can see even a bigger wave coming. It's no longer a matter of just a differentiation, but it's an issue that it's business as usual these days. Not only that, we see now that 1/3 of the global economy is committed to this, and we start to see adoption of those rules and in some even governmental policies. For example, the U.S. White House procurement policy has called the SBTi as one requirement. Norway government has added that to some of their state-owned enterprises as well. So again, the ripple is a wave, and it is coming everywhere. Why it's so important to do what we do, and that's where was your question. So that's the second point. Well, if we don't define what good looks like from the start, it's very hard to define if you're achieving those goals, right? We really have to define from the start what success looks like in a standardized way, because that's how you can evaluate if you're meeting those goals, if you're setting the KPIs, et cetera. If you don't do that in a standardized way, there's the risk that that corporate climate action becomes a storytelling competition. Each one telling the good stuff that they're doing, but without a comparable, well-defined method. And that's hence, I think, one of the key value added that we are bringing to the global economy is that definition of success, so everybody can know very transparently what it looks like. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that the definition of success is based on not what we can do, but what needs to happen. The principle of the science-based target is really trying to define what the global models are telling us and what really needs to happen in order for us to keep our global emissions under the thresholds that have been agreed. And a final point on why we do that, and I think Marcela pointed that out at the beginning, is because we need to change the way business think. Instead of thinking balance sheet over balance sheet, and I know it's hard for some of folks that are in executive positions to think too much in the long term, but defining those long-term objectives are very, very important, exactly to change the perception of times and planning which are needed by corporate actors to really tackle those goals, because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon that we need to run to deliver on those objectives. To conclude, the final point of my intervention was, what does this all has to do with global food systems in general, and Brazil specifically? We work in all of the sectors of the global economy, but also in food, agriculture, and land use. More recently, we published our food, agriculture, and land guidance, which really focus on the idiosyncrasies of the food and agricultural sector. And I must say that I'm biased. Having worked for more than 20 years on food and agriculture and sustainability, that's the sector that reached the closest to my heart. And being a Brazilian, I'm also a little bit biased, right? So two things to conclude on that front. What does it mean for agriculture? One, it was already mentioned by Walter, regardless of fossil fuels to the majority of the emissions globally and energy, but food and agriculture systems is 1/4. So there's no way we can tackle our global food problem, global emission problem, if we don't tackle that on food and agriculture as well. And as I said, I came from the food and agricultural sector, and now I'm learning about cement and oil and gas and buildings. And I usually tell to my colleagues back on the food and agricultural systems is that we actually got it less hard than other sectors. Some sectors we need to completely transform themselves, like the energy one. Food and agriculture does need to do what it does better. You don't have really to retransform that. And one of the reasons is because it has a superpower. It's a big source of emission, but if it's done well, it can actually help capture and store emissions. So when it comes to Brazil, we really have two things that we need to tackle: deforestation and sustainable land use. And that's probably, again, when I say we got it easy, is because it's probably one of the smallest marginal costs that we got on the globe to reduce emissions. That's the good news. The bad news, I think the challenges are twofold. One is that majority of the emissions are in supply chain. So it was mentioned here, the traceability and dealing with your upstream supply is the number one thing that food and agricultural companies need to deal with. And the second inconvenient truth, and Walter touched that on a little bit, is that although majority of the things we just have to do what we need better, the truth is, if all of the world is to eat meat as we do in Brazil or as we do in the US, the system cannot support that. So I fully agree that we cannot, and we still need meat, but we need to bring this inconvenient truth on the discussion that all of the world cannot eat meat the way that we Brazilians, Argentines, or Americans eat meat. And that's one of the inconvenient truths and the global challenge. But again, food and agriculture has a less hard way than some other sectors. I'm very glad to be here and look forward for the discussions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Luis. It's just really helpful to hear about the definition of good in some ways and benchmarking what must as opposed to what could, which is very important. But also now, the onus, of course, as well, is partly to our next speaker's job is as a sustainability director for Marfrig, is how do you use systems such as traceability and others to really demonstrate that it's not the must could be delivered by the could part as well. So why don't I pass to you, Paulo Pianes, please, Sustainability Director for Marfrig.
Okay, thank you, Bernice. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, all of you. Actually, we believe, and I'm very positive, that Brazil has the conditions to have free deforestation and fully traced cattle production. It is possible. The conditions are available in Brazil, and we have the instrument and the data to do that. And I think that now we have open dialogue and the conditions in the government level to put in place this need that we have in the cattle production. As well as I believe that traceability is the main issue that we have to show to the world that we have beef production, free deforestation beef production, and we have technology to establish and to implement low carbon beef production as well. Livestock production is a challenge the whole world. In Brazil, specifically, we have to reconcile production and conservation, and it is that possible to do. Brazil now has the instruments to do that, such as the Rural and Environmental Registry and the Animal Movement Permission. With these two instruments that we have available now in Brazil, if we have a combination between these instruments and data, we can establish, we can put in place a very strong, a very huge traceability system from now. And in a company level, Marfrig has been working very hard in the last 4 years, and we established and implemented a very sophisticated, a very huge system to trace the whole supply chain based in an inclusion perspective. Most of the strategy around the world, when we are talking about banks, retailers, and other actors in the supply chain, the strategy has been based in an exclusion. You cannot supply just because you have some environmental or social issue to be addressed. But we believe that in the last 10 or 12 years, this approach is not or has not a good way to do that. To do that. 4 years ago, we established a new approach for that. This new approach is based in to understand the reality of the farmers in our supply chain, and then after that, if they have or if he has some environmental issue or social issue, how we can support them to address and to fix the issue, and then we can keep in our supply chain producing in a sustainable way. It's much more intelligent to act in this way. And we believe that we have to establish some requirements to do that. In terms of financial markets or the banks, we have to develop new instruments to support this strategy. For example, rural credit or rural loans in Brazil don't fit in this need to support or to transform the cattle production in Brazil. On the other hand, we have to support the supply chain with technology, technical assistance, and support to regularize land or environmental issues. And then we can have to implement a real sustainable way or sustainable production model. That's what Marfrig is doing. And we have a model, we have a structure, we have the technology that shows that is possible to implement a sustainable beef production, and totally traced and with a low carbon, in a low carbon perspective as well. So I believe that we are dialoguing with the government, and we believe that we can be and we are a transformation agent in this sector, and our system, our model, our technology is totally available to be scaled up in a federal level. So with this, I believe that that we have now in Brazil, actually, a real condition to show to the world that the model to produce beef should be based on inclusion, on technical model to do that, and based in a sustainable way, in the low carbon production. So Marfrig has the instruments to do that, and we are doing that right now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I mean, I just want to be clear that I have watched the Times Everybody, and it's kind of shockingly precise, everybody, to the point of 5 minutes. But so the good news here is that you're saying you can. And by the way, there's a bit of geekery going on in the questions here, on the very technical terms about supply chain coming through questions online. A bit of geekery that I'm not entirely sure I entirely understand myself, so I'm going to need some help explaining it to me in a second. But before we do so, though, last but most certainly not least, we have Isabella Teixeira, who's the co-chair of the International Resource Panel. Minister, we should call you Minister? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, always, exactly. Please.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's so nice to meet you again, my dear friend, and also Anna. Thank you for joining us today in London. Let me see how I can share some thoughts here, understanding this momentum, this political momentum in Brazil and also in the world. And of course, that everyone mentioned that have technology solutions, et cetera, in the role of Brazil. I think that 2 or 3 things must be very important to be understood. The first one is Brazil is part of the world. Okay, it's important to observe this. Sometimes people want to discuss about Brazil thinking that we are not part of the world. There's Amazon region, something that's untouchable. We have more than 30 million people, Brazilians, that live in the Amazon region. Okay, and the lowest rate of development, human development index in Brazil. The majority of these people live in cities, 80%. Okay, so it's very interesting how a country that has a territory, a biome, that means around 60% of our national territory, how should bring Amazonia together with us and Brazil together with the Amazon regions to make sense that we can drive solutions, not be part of the problem. And I can say this in a comfortable position because as minister, I have the lowest rates of deforestation during my term. And I know the difficulties and the complex to deal with organized crime and environmental crime, and the co-responsibility of international markets to drive or to buy things that not necessarily technology was not available in the past as is today. So it's my first point. My second point is that Brazil is a country with solutions, okay? And a country with singularities. Amazonia, or Amazon forest is one of them, but also Atlantic, South Atlantic is another one. We have more than 8,500 thousands of kilometers of coast zone. No other countries have this in the world. You have more than 150 years of peace with our neighbors. And we are part of a really important international group. Only 15 countries in the world have full diplomacy relationship with all the countries in the world. I'm very proud of Brazilians to be part of this. So we're able to dialogue with the world. It is very important, and when you go to dialogue with anyone, to understand their realities and to speak their languages. So my feelings, my second point, people must learn more how to share with Brazil solutions, or be part of the solution, be constructive, and not only reactive, and be proactive if we want to change global politics. The third point, climate change is part of the new global geopolitics. And Amazonia in Brazil is important because of Amazonia. So if you want to come into the climate change agenda in Brazil, and you know this as my friend, but probably my new friends don't know about this, our focus on climate change is based on nature. It's always difficult. It's not based on energy. It's your difficult, okay, your barrier. My energy mix in Brazil today is what you want to have by 2026, 2027. And I'm ashamed that probably we are not able to deal with this because we have a war here, and your alliance to tackle this war is based on carbon. Okay, so don't discuss with us without looking behind your backyard. This is very important politically because we're looking for to address something very critical for business and for political world, credibility and trust. And we need to go against the lack of credibility and trust that we have today between North and South, and we don't have between East and Western world, considering a country like Brazil or the global South. So it's very important to understand when you have a company that's under pressure. I put pressure on them. okay, in the past. I'm still putting pressure on us. Okay? And it's very important to understand how a business leader wants, okay, let's try to change. And what is happening here today, even considering science-based target and nature-based solution, et cetera, is that probably you have really high difficulty to address this, consider the other private sector or all the private sector in Brazil. Because we are bringing not only solutions, innovations, business model, but also science as a political actor. And if you want to play based, looking for to attract credibility, let's move the pieces and really to be part of the solutions. Let's not wait for more than 30 years for IPCC to say that we have a problem. I'm sorry. But again, okay, developing countries, G7, as today you have in Financial Times, you don't have the solutions for the world. Because if you had, you should probably solve this 30 or 40 years ago. I was too young when I have done agreement of Rio 92. I was there. Okay? And I was the head of Brazilian delegation of Paris Agreement. And I know the difficulty to address solutions, to change, to pay for this, the cost to pay for this. How can face things? We need to come together. And this is something very important because it's really a hard task to convince business leaders or business companies to come into the room with another adults, okay, to address solutions, make sure that the short-term perspective have trade-offs and tensions that not necessarily will imply in solution long-term perspective. So my feeling is that I think that this is an asset, it's a new trajectory. I think that we need to build together credibility, trust. We need to come into regional perspectives because it's not only the global perspective. How the South America should play an innovative role to bring solutions, to share solutions, also to go with food productions, not only based on hunger, or also to fighting poverty, education, etc., but based on how aging, because we are getting older, God bless me, okay? And we are getting old and have aging, you need to move from a care economy to care society. And this means that we need to have a new way to have food production. So my feeling is that let's invite the private sector to discuss based on reality and not on something that's not touchable or tangible, and make sure that we can provide jobs, you can understand better the role of technologies, and don't forget, nature crisis comes together with democracy crisis in the Western world. This is very important for me, for my society, to maintain Brazilian democracy stand up. Let's do it, but let's work hard, and of course, I promise for the one that like to hug the trees, that we can have low carbon beef as soon as possible. I hope so. Thank you. Back to you.
If I follow my order sheet, which I've been following, we should be doing a moderated discussion part right now. But because I work at Chatham House, I'm an international relations person as well. Of course, I'm very interested in a lot of questions about Brazil and the world, and particularly Brazil's potential contribution to the world in the context of what's coming up in G20 and possibly even COP as well. So I thought that what we should do is to get there later on, which is why I thought that it may be helpful. Did I miss something? I thought that it may be helpful for us to dig in some of the questions from the audience, because I've got quite a lot of very specific questions online and also in the room as well. And then, just so you know, my moderated part, I'd like you to sort of really offer us some thoughts about how can we best, with Brazil, rethink the global agenda as you come into the G20 chair and other things down the line. So that's coming at some point in the next 40 minutes or so. But before we do that, I want to take some questions from the room and also from a lot of the questions that's coming through. I would start by saying that if I may ask some of the questions from online. Well, a lot of them are going to be for Marfrig, to be fair. Don't worry about I mean, a lot of them are basically saying, how could you? In some ways, right? And also, even if you did what you said you were going to do, what about JVS? What about all the others? Because you're not the only producer. So there's fundamentally, my very high-level summary of a lot of very detailed questions. More will come your way, but let's start with that. We all know we know about deforestation risks. We know about livestock-related deforestation risks. We know that scaling is a challenge. We know that even if you do brilliantly, you're not the only one, and many other actors in the system. So how could you? It's really kind of and how could you persuade the rest of the world really that you really have a way forward that is in fact doing all the things that you said you should do? So I'm afraid this is a question from Marfrig, but obviously Isabella and Walter and also Luis as well, if you want to chip in as well, and then we'll take the question in the room after that.
Well, it is important to understand a little bit the complexity of the livestock production in Brazil, first of all. We have 2.5 million producers. Actually, Brazil has 5 million farms. 2.5 million farms is dedicated in the cattle production in Brazil. 2.5 million farmers. The other point, we have more than 1.2 thousand industries, meat packers, slaughterhouse, producing beef in Brazil. Most of the production are in Cerrado, Amazon, and the south of the country. So, when we are talking about how to scale up traceability or how to implement systems to prevent or to avoid deforestation, we have to keep in mind that it is important to have a consultation or an interlocution between or among the several actors in the supply chain. First of all, in the industry or in a sector level, we are working together, and Marfrig has leading this process, showing that it's possible to do that just because we have in place a mechanism to do that. But we have been engaging other important, very important actors, such as banks, just because we believe that we have to have conditions to finance this transformations in the cattle production. There is no transformation, there is no other way to do that if we don't have enough money, enough financial resources to do that. So we have to build a new way to finance the cattle production in Brazil, to put in place new technologies, to implement the technology to trace the production, and we have to develop some public policies to do this as well. There is no regulation in Brazil to trace the production in cattle, in soy, or in other commodities that we produce in Brazil. So it is important to keep in mind that to do that, the approach should be different from the last 12 years, as I said, and I believe that now we have the conditions to do that just because, as I said, we have the model. We are doing this in our supply chain. We can engage the sector, but we need to engage government to develop public policy to do that, and we have the financial agents to finance the transformations that we need to put in place.
Thank you. What I want to do is I want to take a few questions here and then come back to you all, and then I will bring some more questions from online as well. And so I'll have the person in the middle and then the person over there. So the microphone will come to you. Please introduce yourself as well as you speak.
Of course. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming here and speaking today. I'm Dr. Nadeau. I'm a member of Chatham House and a representative of the United States. While we all know we need to change our eating habits, the United States is known for having an attention deficit when it comes to engagement in Latin America. What can the United States do from a trade, export, technology issue to support Brazil in this transition to more sustainable food production?
I must confess, I find that a lovely, refreshing question that I wasn't expecting that.
She has a beautiful voice.
Sorry?
She has a beautiful voice. Absolutely.
I'm not sure that we should be commenting on that, but nonetheless. The gentleman over there, please.
Thank you, Rowan. I mean, I have so much pressure with all the people in the audience. I will make the question in Portuguese.
Hold on. Let me put my thing in.
Sim. É pouco uma questão existencial ou até filosófica. Podemos falar realmente que o boi verde existe? A gente está apresentando algo como se fosse de baixo carbono, mas na verdade, quando se olha sobre o consumo, o impacto em termos de emissão, toda a água que eles pegam, etc., não é realmente verde. Então, minha primeira pergunta é essa. A segunda, o senhor fala muito de modelo, sistema e tecnologia. O senhor poderia apresentar um pouco mais, porque é um termo muito tecnocrático e a maioria das pessoas não entende bem, não sabe o que se trata. E a terceira pergunta é para a ministra. Hoje temos o prazer de ter o melhor aluno na sala, Marfrig, em relação a isso, mas gostaria de saber para o governo, o que o governo faz para colocar mais pressão sobre os outros produtores no setor que estão, vamos dizer, os alunos que não são bons, os meus alunos.
So there is a question from the online that is a similar question, which is that if companies won't come together voluntarily themselves, what can government do? So if I can lump these together a little bit, so what can governments do, and then what can other countries, such as the US, help as well? So Isabella, would you like to take this, and then maybe we then go to Walter, Luis, and
I can talk a little bit about technology.
You want to go first?
I think that Professor Walter could talk a little bit about the green cow.
Yeah.
The green cattle.
The green cattle.
Is there such a thing?
Yes, it is. So several things. First of all, one of the challenges is methane emissions, right? Methane emission has 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens. Where is that carbon coming from? Is that new carbon that was buried as petroleum, was buried as natural gas, was part of coal? Or was that carbon part of the cycle that has always been there? It's a question. I was very curious about that question, and so I just recently found a paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the US. And this guy studied the concentration, not the concentration, the emission of methane from animals about 12,000 years ago. What happened 12,000 years ago, nobody understands exactly why. 1 billion big animals died in a very short time. Just in South America, 100 species were lost. And these were big animals. The average weight was 1,000 kilos, about a ton. So the question is, before that big extinction, what was the amount of methane being emitted to the atmosphere from animals? And how does that compare to today's emissions? Because today is a lot of cattle, almost the whole population of ruminants are domestic. And the level of methane emitted 12,000 years ago was very similar to the level of methane being emitted today. So it's not, first, we are not injecting new carbon like we do when we burn fossil fuels. And two, in general, globally, the amount of methane coming from domestic ruminants is quite similar to what happened 12,000 years ago. So from a carbon methane standpoint, we want to go back to an equilibrium. Which equilibrium? Because 12,000 years ago, it was not very different from now. Methane from ruminants. I'm not saying anything else, but other things. And then is a water issue. This concept of water footprint. Does it make sense? When you say you need, I can't remember the number now, but something like 18,000 liters per kilo of beef, Does that mean that you extract those 18,000 liters to produce 1 kilo of meat? Or this is 95% of the water is staying in the system? And is it the same to talk about water footprint in a place like Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil than in Tunisia or in Morocco or in Israel? No. So now, that's one part. Where the cattle, the animal is not green, where it is mismanaged. When you, of course, when you cut a forest and you plant a pasture, but also in a natural grassland where you overgraze, when you take more carbon than what you're returning, when you're degrading the soil, when your soil organic carbon is going down, that's not green. But again, one of the points that I tried to make in my first intervention is not all the production systems are the same, and some are sustainable, including the ones that have cattle.
Thank you very much, Walter. I think that the it depends answer is an excellent but also complicated one for someone like Luis Amaral, who has to, in some ways, translate a lot of context dependency into a system such as SBTI, which obviously have to pull all these, if you accept the context, let's just say, and we have a question that was questioning whether or not context matters in some ways. And so in some ways, Luis, your job is to help us pull together all of these contextual elements, which of course have been important in order to be comparable, so that there are in the audience different finance actors and others who all have to make sense of these complexities around how do we really measure, for example, sustainability in terms of location. I mean, our professor, Tim Benton here, teaches me every day, it depends, basically. Luis, why don't I come to you?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that question. Yeah, I'll make just 3 quick points based on the questions that I heard. Well, the first one was, does it matter if one company is doing? The second one was, what is the role of the government? And the third one, what is the potential impact of a company action on actually delivering the outcomes that we want? So the first one, the basis of what we try to do is that every company, the science-based approach is, if every company were to do what they need to do, we'll solve the issue. So I'm the first one to recognize that we need everyone on board, right? But we're trying to define what is the fair share that each company needs to do, and it's within its responsibilities. That's the first thing. So, but I'm the first one to recognize that that is not enough. Then it brings to the second point, which is the role of governments. I joke around with my team, but it's true that my dream is that we become irrelevant in a few years, SBTI, because we only exist to tackle a market failure because governments haven't really done their job. So we're here to kind of facilitate that, but we do need regulation, definitely. And I think one of the important roles of folks that take the lead is that they show the way, and they increase the cost of inaction by their peers, and they increase the cost of inaction by policymakers by demonstrating that it can be done. We see again, as I mentioned, with the growth, exponential growth of companies taking ambitious actions, that governments are starting to feel more comfortable that eventually they can follow up with regulation. We raise the bar so governments can raise the floor. And then the final point that I wanted to make was on the one making that even one actor can help change the game. When it comes to deforestation, and now I'm taking a little bit of my SBTI hat and putting back my old Brazilian food and agriculture specialist hat. Money matters, and one of the key reasons of deforestation in the country is the expectation of increased value added of the land. Folks go out there, deforest because they expect that in 2, 3, 5 years' time that land is going to value more. And I've worked in a bank, and I remember seeing cases in which the business plan did not stick together if you did not incorporate the increased value of land. We need to change that disincentive structure. And one way of doing that is saying, if you're not buying from that land anymore, it means that the value of that land is not going to increase as much as you thought it would. If you're not financing that land, so even one actor can have marginal impacts, which have changes to the perceptions and expectations of economic returns on that land.
Thank you, Luis. I also note that you avoid my question, which is how do you pull together apples and oranges? But we can come to this later. I noted that you avoided my question to you. Isabella, would you like to contribute? And then we take more questions as well. Isabella, please.
Thank you. I think that I'd like to highlight 2 or 3 points here, trying to answer or to comment or additional comments considering the answers here. First of all, United States and Brazil used to have a robust bilateral cooperation. It's very important for the unity of Americas, and you know how this is important today. But we need to share interests. And it's absolutely critical that you can identify how to come together bilaterally, in my personal experience. I manage this in person when we have Paris Agreement trajectory, and we have bilateral agreements between Brazil and the United States, and it was together with bilateral agreements with China and also with Germany and Norway. It was the basis of Paris Agreement negotiations. So I think that's how important is don't go into the unilateral decisions. It's important to dialogue. It's important to recognize the realities and how we can share not only commitments, but share values and ambitions. And why it is important, not only in short-term perspectives, but in long-term perspectives to avoid setbacks, okay? And I absolutely agree that the United States must play a really important role together with Brazil, considering Americas, okay? South and North Ocean, Atlantic Oceans, and how we come in North and South and North, not as used in the past. It's important to consider what's happened today when we go into climate finance or global development finance and Bretton Woods reform, and the role of the United States to discuss with Brazil how the South should be more engaged and more, how it should come into the new governance of the international financial world, and how South should play an important role to address and to allocate funds for development in the world. The old model, of course, is over. It's very important to understand the role of Global South to address really robust solutions in climate finance and also development finance. So I think that the United States used to come together with Brazil. Of course, we have difference, God bless us, but I believe that also in private sector and science, okay, we have really huge opportunity to dialogue bilaterally and to come together to an international debate. Brazil used to play a neutral role, have diplomats here. This is very important. Our climate diplomacies used to be very important for the world and for us in person. And this agenda is very important for us for soft power, the expression of soft power. And I think that even some Brazilians understand that the world is something from Miami to New York, but we believe that we should come together and closer than we used to be in the past. But for this is also, in my personal opinion, the critical issue that must address is how we can have our democracy preserved for both sides, okay? And you know what's happening in your country, consider the Trumpism, and what's happening in my country is Bolsonarism. We need to avoid this. I recommend all of you, okay? Avoid this. My second point, very quickly, I think that when you go into this debate about development world, Western world development, it's very important 2 or 3 things. First of all, let's avoid fake dreams. Okay, information in fake dreams. Okay, we have in this century, we have since the beginning, we have crisis. Okay, we have the September 11, and you have the financial crisis by 2006, 7, and 8. You have pandemic, and now we have the war. Okay, and we have together democracy crisis. It's very important to observe the dynamics of this century. So, and infodemic is part of this crisis. So we need to tackle, okay, to go against fake dreams and data and information, because this is a digital world. This century is a convergence of 3 ages: climate, digital and technological world, and bio age that is emerging, how to grow with nature. It's not how to hug trees, okay? It's easy to hug trees, okay? It's so easy, but it's not more than this. So I think that's very important, that you need to move from fake green wishing and green doing. Everyone's, I want to be green, but until now, what I know is that I can recognize is that the dollar green is more important, Okay, so we need to change the things to understand that the new generation, that's why Marcela is so important. She has 20 years. She's 20 years old. It's really a crime, environmental crime for me, okay? But 20 years old. Yesterday I was talking with her about 2001 and about China. Then China came into World Trade Organization, and she said, I was not born. I was so upset. Okay. So it's impossible. But look how fantastic it is. A new generation is coming here to understand what's happening. And in the future, the next 10 years, you'll be absolutely responsible to drive the solution. So what it is, we need a new language. We need a new way to dialogue. We need a new way not to impose things. We need to build things based on reality and make sure that we can address solutions, considering the difficulties of the countries, all the societies around the world. And finally, for this we need to share values and share interests. Okay, sometimes it's very difficult to have unilateral decisions and nobody knows about the costs to change. Okay, what's happened here in some countries, okay, you have probably consequences in the future when you go in a country like Brazil that you're able to pay for this. I can sell here 1 ton of soil without deforestation. You have to pay additionally $30 per ton. Are you prepared to do this now? About the inflation that you have in this country, for example, about your jobs, about your economic growth? Are you prepared to this? Or let's discuss how we can do this and share our objectives and share our dreams and our values. It is important not only to come together, but to avoid setbacks in the future. This is very important, okay? You cannot have examples. We need to reveal things. And finally, I think that when you go into government, your question is very interesting, okay? Because I'm not part of the government. God bless me, okay? I was in the past. Okay, but what I'm saying is that also we need to change the way that the relationship between society and governments. In states, okay? We need to come together to make sure, be co-responsible. This is something really new in Paris Agreement, to have a chapter fully dedicated to non-state actors and co-responsibilities, how to manage this, how should come to the governments, for example, here. What is the model, regulatory model demands, as Jorge Viana mentioned, the new narrative that will emerge from public policy and national Congress, how this should come together with us, okay? So I think that it's important to prepare things, to be co-responsible, not only comes to Brazil, this is my proposal, bye-bye, you cannot put this in practice, you're guilty. No. If you have democracy, you have to go to National Congress. It is very important to go into Parliament to understand the diversity of society and the understanding of the challenge. And my last comment, because this is very important, nobody probably pay attention to this. This is an agenda, climate change, geopolitics, Ukraine war, everything that you mentioned here, this is not part of the political imaginary of the societies in the developing world. They're looking for to address how we can manage jobs, how we can manage hunger, how we can manage social inequalities, how we go against racism, et cetera, et cetera. It's very important that this agenda comes down on the ground, and make sure that Tonys, Harrys, Marys, they are part of the solutions. And this is our responsibility, to decouple things and recouple things in such a way that people must come together based on solutions. So let's do it together, and I invite you to come to Brazil to drink caipirinha, low carbon caipirinha, I promise. Okay? An organic one. Ah, e você gosta? Você conhece e gosta?
Conheço.
Gosta? Do you like it?
Sim, claro.
Então let's drink it.
Well, on that invitation, I'd like to take more questions from the room. I mean, again, I just looked through all the questions again, and I just want to reassure everybody that the questions will be seen by all the panelists. It's not just me. And then, so it's a specific question about supply chain, and which I may pick up a few. But before, I want to stick a few more questions from the room, if I may, because there's one at the front, definitely, but are there others in the back of the room? Just this one at the front, please. Oh, 2 at the front, even.
Our ambassador is here.
Oh, okay.
Isn't there somebody else in the front?
Please.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, please.
Have the floor.
Thank you. I don't have a question myself. I would just like to ask Paulo, perhaps, to answer his question with regards to technology.
Yeah.
This is something we shouldn't miss, I think. Thank you.
Yes, well, I was going to ask the same question. I'm Hilde Rapp, and muito obrigado, and muito patient. But you talked about the sustainability.
Introduce yourself, please.
Oh, sorry, I did, I thought.
Oh, sorry.
I'll do it again.
Yes,
Hilda Rapp, Centre for International Peacebuilding, and many thanks. Muito obrigado. And I wanted to also ask about science, because obviously you talked about different ecosystems at different times in history. But I think what you're doing is actually intervening in an ecosystem now in a way that you haven't spelled out, and I think perhaps you might want to. I was thinking that you might be using biochar, you might be using additives to your cows' food that produces methane, you might be doing all sorts of exciting things that are part of the circular economy that we tend to champion in Chatham House. And I thought you, with your expertise in government, might lean on governments and say, how about financing and injecting money into kind of sustainable circular economy, not just the kind of regulatory tracing and all that kind of very important governance issues, but also just simply injecting money through government banks into the ground, into the into the production process itself.
Yep, join the subsidies race everywhere. There's another question there. Thank you. Let's take one more question as well, please.
Hi, thank you. Jonathan Singh, Chatham House member. We've heard a bit of a critique of an overly global north-focused approach to different areas of the discussion today. But I wonder if each of you in your respective areas of business, academia and government could enlighten us on what mechanisms of cooperation you're engaged in within the global south in environmental processes review and also within food and agriculture systems. So what methods of cooperation do you have with other major partners in the global south?
That actually is a question that I would have asked to wrap, to be honest, so I'm grateful for the question. Should we start from Paulo, Walter, Isabella, and Luis?
Yes, technology perspective. So it is not so easy to talk about the technology that we are using right now to trace the cattle, but it is important to... There are two ways, main ways to trace the cattle production. The first one, and the conventional one, is to have ear tags or ship to trace the cattle production in an animal individual way. To do that, it is important to have money and time to do that. It is possible. We have this model in Uruguay, as well as we have the same model implemented in Australia, for example. And in my perspective, we have to do this in Brazil as well. But on the other hand, we have other ways to trace the cattle. Not in an individual way, but we can control the cattle race along the supply chain. What we are doing right now is a traceability system or a control of the origin of the animals since the birth to the slaughter, using georeferencing and geomonitoring system, in which we cross information from the official entity in Brazil responsible for the maps and the control of deforestation, the presence of native vegetation, and then we can cross the image every year in each cattle purchase that we have. And every day we control about 5,000 dues every day. We control about 29 million hectares every day. The area is the same of the area of UK. So to do this, we need to know the perimeters of each farm that we have in our supply chain. Since the farms, the indirect farms or indirect suppliers, until the direct suppliers. That what we are doing right now is to have the declaratory, the information from our direct suppliers, and then we have the information from the direct suppliers of our direct suppliers, then the indirect suppliers, and then. With this, we can every day or in each purchase, we can cross these informations, and then we have the information if there is deforestation, if the production is in a conservation unit, if the production is in a indigenous area. So with this, we can control the whole supply chain. And this model is possible to do that in a country level, and we can make this system a little bit more huge if you have the information about some official data in Brazil. As GTA, the movement permission, the animal movement permission, associated with the rural and environmental registry. That's what we are doing right now.
Yeah, there's another question online about the loopholes in the rural environmental registry, the car, and also the GTA as well. Why haven't you done it? So there's a lot of questions specifically on those for you. But also online, if I may bring a couple more questions from online. One we didn't really touch. We mainly touched on the environment, but we didn't really touch, for example, AMR, antimicrobial resistance, in terms of obviously livestock farming. And I just want to keep repeating that there are lots of questions online, which is basically based on how could you? And also, more importantly, why are you increasing production? Why are you not reducing? Because that's what we heard many people need to do. So just want to reinforce that a lot of questions kept coming in online, which are on those. But on the question around closing loopholes around CAR and GTA, let's just say, perhaps a little bit on that before we move.
So the best way to do that, I invite all of you to know or to know in a real time online how the system that we use works. But the best way that Brazil has right now to put in place a traceability system would be a system based on GTA. GTA is the movement guide for animals. With this, every movement that the animals, that cattle has in Brazil, we have the information about the farms or the territories in which the animals is along the whole time that the animal birth until the slaughtering phase. So the idea is to make this data available for everybody. With this, we can have two very important points. First one, it is possible to put in place a very strong traceability system in Brazil. On the other hand, we can have transparency about where is the cattle, where are the cattle production in Brazil. So that's why we believe that the best way to do that, and Marfrig has this point, GTA would be available for everybody.
So you roll them out. No, so I mean we're sort of gently coming to the last 10 minutes. So I'd like to sort of encourage you to think about wrapping as well, as you think through the questions. So a couple of questions still hanging about. I think we've done technology, so I'm happy with that. Questions around how do you encourage South-South cooperation on some of these questions, and I also think that the question about antimicrobial resistance, the role of livestock. There's a question here which is really just for Marfrig, which is how much of it's from Greenpeace, I think, is they asking you how much of your profits have been invested back in restoring and making up for, obviously, all the emissions that you might have caused. How much of percentage of profits? These are sort of increasingly questions that is being asked of all corporations in some ways. And I will also let you all have a chance to, I mean, I wasn't being particularly strict today. I wasn't holding on. I'm quite aware that you're ignoring the question I want you to answer sometimes, but I would give you a chance to answer all the bits that all the things you want to say that you felt that you couldn't really. And you have about 1 minute, maybe like 45 seconds or 1 minute each, unless we have more questions here. So we can start from perhaps Luis on the screen, and then we'll go from then Paulo, then Walter and Isabella. How about that, in that order, yeah? Luis, why don't you sort of think through all the questions you've heard today? A lot of it is really about what does sectoral level transformation look like, really? It's good to hear leadership from a company, but at the same time, really translating that into sectoral level, but also global level action is a different thing. And SBTi has a very specific role, I think, in helping us deliver that. Why don't you think of your concluding remarks in that context, please?
Fantastic, Bernie. And I thought I had answered your question last time, so I'll try to reemphasize that, which was the point A that I had on the press question. Number one, definition, a common definition of success. If that success is not standardized and everybody understands what it is and is transparent, it becomes a storytelling competition. And that's what SBTi does. It defines in a very standardized way ways to compare apples with apples, oranges with oranges, so folks can see through and compare that in a standardized definition of success. And therefore, folks can also demonstrate their progress towards that very well standardized rate of success. That's the point one. The second one that I said is that for us, that definition of success takes into the consideration the carbon budget and the systematic transformations that happen across the world. That's why a definition of a standard for a sector takes a year or even more to get to there. And I'm not the climate scientist myself, but if I could summarize what it is you look, what are the emissions that this sector can have 10, 20, 30 years in the future, according to the global carbon budgets? And then you just do the reverse engineering and say, well, here's the pathway on this to happen. So that's how we bring this transformation. Finally, recognizing that we need everybody on board if we're to do that. We, as a standard setter, cannot do everything ourselves. We define what the path is. We help the leaders to kind of open up that path with the hope that they can bring on their peers, and with the ultimate hope that then governments can really follow, because that's what we need to really bring that for everybody everywhere. But we will continue to be the monitoring of what good looks like aligns in a standardized way, aligned with the climate model tells us.
Very helpful. I'm just regretting asking you to go first because I think that would have been quite a good last comment, actually. Walter, I mean, you heard a lot of questions today about, obviously, not just science, but also some of the contested nature of it and how hard it is in some ways, despite the best efforts of Luis and others, to try and help us aggregate them. So I sort of thought, what are your thoughts in terms of how we move forward, given that the contestation over some of these fundamental questions aren't really going to go away?
So it has a lot to do with what Luis just mentioned. Is a common vision of success. Well, what is a common vision of a sustainable food system?
Yeah.
And how do you measure that? How do you measure sustainability? How do you know you're not being greenwashed, right? How do you know you're really certifying something that is sustainable? And the way to do it now, I'm telling you now, we're starting an activity with scientists from US, New Zealand, Australia, Uruguay, Brazil, Argentina, and what we're going to do is, okay, what is a set of indicators, not just carbon, yes, greenhouse gases, but also impact on biodiversity, water quality, water quantity, animal welfare, food safety. What are indicators that are scientifically robust? So that first farmers can use to measure their own production, the sustainability of their production system. But also the private companies can then see, okay, this beef that I am buying from this farmer has some kind of seal that is backed by good science, where you measure all these different dimensions of sustainability. And for that, you need cooperation between, like this example that I was making, this is a cooperation between universities and research centers from all these countries that are looking to the same goal. And the goal is, how do we measure, how do we define things in ways that are scientifically robust, but also that farmers can measure. Not something that you need to send a sample to Geneva. No, what can a farmer do to measure real sustainable practices? And it's very common to what we see. If we get an agreement with that, then we will really reduce the greenwashing, the thousands of consulting firms that are promising to measure sustainability and green stamps. We need good science, good, applied, robust science.
It's also participatory, right? From what you're saying, is the fact that you have to work together in a participatory way, so that you could trust what you come on the other side is part of what you have.
So that glad that you mentioned that. So that effort is being done with farmers. So what we're doing is we're proposing a lot of indicators now. Let's try it with farmers. So what do you think? We know it makes sense scientifically. Do you think it's practical to measure? So you're right, it's very participatory.
Paolo, would you like to build on this as well? I mean, you're aware a lot of questions are obviously about Marfrig as well. So if you want to sort of wrap up as well, then I'll go to Isabella last for maybe some of this Brazil and the world question and G20 as well. Paolo, so the questions around, obviously, are you going to work towards reducing consumption too, for example? And also questions around AMR and other associated issues around livestock, but also questions around how do you really use your leadership in this to drive sectoral transformation, perhaps, and what can you really help do, given that you're not the only one?
Well, I think that the main message, the main point here, when we are talking about livestock, it is not only about technology, only about a very important issue, how to keep the forest from environmental perspective, for sure. But it is important to talk about the social perspective as well. I think that all the regulation around the world is based on exclusion. All the regulation around the world doesn't mention or doesn't have any about how to support the production around the world. All the regulation or all the actions around the world don't talk about how the countries could contribute with the development of the livestock production in Brazil around the world. So I believe that we have to have a new approach on that. We have to include, we have to understand that in Amazon, for example, there are 30 million people living there. So how to reconcile production, how to reconcile social issues with the cattle production, with the commodities production. So that's the real perspective that the countries around the world should be. That's my point, and that's what we believe in Marfrig. That's our approach right now, and we believe that's the best way to do that.
Thank you very much. Isabella?
Oh yes, I think that I need 1 hour more, but no problem.
You have an hour, as long as you need.
No, let's relax. 2 points. I think that, first of all, circular economy or circularity, the new economies, the new green economies, they're absolutely important, but they should come together with the transition to understand the transformative process. So we cannot go into renewable world without dealing, for example, with strategic minerals, and what the new challenge of mining in the world is not necessarily, should not be based in our experience in the past, for example. So circularity is absolutely critical to come into the supply chains and to change the consumer behavior. So we need to address demand, okay, and not only production. And this is very, very important. And I think when going to put money, inject money, you need to understand the role of natural resource, efficient use, to make sure that we can have better choice in short-term perspectives. And consumer, absolute consumption and consumer, they're very important to, when you go in countries, for example, that to have part of the society without access, it's really hard to discuss efficiency. When you go into India, for example, it's the Prime Minister used to say the energy transition in India means access energy. It's different, like a country like Brazil that have 87% of our electric power mix based on renewable energy. 87%. Okay, so it's different. You have the median in the world is around 22, 23%. Okay, so I think that the first point is absolutely critical, but you need to understand how to approach the supply chains and how to make sure that step by step you have the consumer engagement, and this makes sense for people. People, when you explain this very well, people can take the right decision and avoid setbacks in the future. Very fast. Second, we cannot forget that we are in the transition looking for to address transformation. Transition doesn't mean that you need to buy time. You don't have time to be bought. I'm sorry, it's over, okay? And so we are absolutely exposed. I'm fully convinced, considering the climate scientists and other ones, and I'm co-chair of a scientific panel, United Nations, that we are absolutely exposed to the extreme events, and this will be very critical the next 10 years or 20 years. It's not only 1.5 Celsius degrees. This is something important, not necessarily strategic to address, considering how people will be exposed to climate change in short-term perspective. What it means? To convince people to be on board and to change, you need to change to really have an ambition to address our narrative not based on tragedy. We need to convince people that we can share solutions. Okay? And unfortunately, all the science that we have today in the world is exactly direct to tragedies. Okay? You have COVID, you have the war. For me, it's impossible to think of war in Europe. Really impossible, but it's true. It's happening. After Glasgow conference, okay? It's impressive. We came to Glasgow after pandemic, everyone's so built, so happy, and to have the war. And to have the wars. This is very important to convince people that the engagement is not only based on technologies, political will, etc. We need to believe that we can do better than we are doing today. Okay? And for this, we need a really innovative relationship with citizens and democracy and trust. Okay? Solidarity is a new political or geopolitical concept that unfortunately is scarce today. And finally, I'd like to remember that I think that when you go into this new perspective of the world, I believe that we can do better than we're doing today. Okay? The past is very important to remember us that was not enough, but we have really good solutions. We had this. I remember 40 years ago when we started discussing this. But what I'm trying to highlight here is that we need to move beyond green wishing. You mentioned greenwashing. Greenwashing seems so easy to have to address, but we go with the green wishing and green doing. People want to do, but nobody necessarily knows how to do this. Okay, and this is the way to convince people that the new process, step-by-step engagement, in person, regionally, in your neighborhood, to make sense that you're not a part of the world. You are part of the new momentum of the global society of the world, that we need to come together also to manage better adaptation and resilience. And that's why nature-based solution, bio-wage emergence, etc., this is not something that comes to think that this is like a fashion perspective, political perspective. No. Okay, this is really very important and really very challenging to make sure that we can grow, have economic growth with nature. Okay, and this is the big challenge that we have today. And for this, we need to change our mindset, considering the last probably 500 years of the development process in the world. Back to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, I was just sort of thinking that even though we may not all start from the same perspective here, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to hear very comprehensive and thoughtful Brazilian perspective on a lot of these questions. But also reminding myself as well, as I listen to you, Isabella, especially just now and others, that no, we're not in a moment of green wishing anymore, because I think all the things you are suggesting is that steps have been taken forward. It may not be enough, by the way, which is almost definitely not enough. But at the same time, we are in a world of trust but verify. And that all these mechanisms that are being put forward are available for all to help verify. Because unless we are in a world where we're putting mechanisms of this sort out in the world for the world to figure out as well whether they're with you or not, perhaps we really don't have a way forward together. But with that, I of course thank you all for your time being here. Okay, sorry, of course, please.
One thing, the next 2 years will be very strategically, okay, for the Global South, mainly because of the role of Brazil and how Brazil will be on floor, on the stage, and will manage really important global agendas. This year we have Amazon Summit, okay, with all the countries Amazon basin. They were invited by the President Lula to come to Brazil and to propose an innovative agenda to come together. So this is an effort of the Global South. We invite global leaders, etc., but we cannot forget that to have regional interests and what is the new political arrangement that should come consider economy and social inclusiveness, economic growth and social inclusion, and also technological sharing perspectives, that how we can manage this agenda. Next year, Brazil will chair G20, okay? And someone asked about example of cooperation that we have now T20, think tanks, T20 and T7 together, looking for, I'm part of this group, to address concrete solutions or proposals to play as a bridge, consider G7 and G20. And why it is important? Because we need an innovative agenda, innovative political speech to make sure that we must go beyond the leaders. Society must become leader, okay? This is really different. And the next, by 2035, Brazil will host COP30, climate change. And she's so happy. Everyone believes, okay, this probably will happen in Amazonia, but look, this is Paris plus 10 conference, okay? And that's why it's very important, our common understanding, looking to our friends from the United States, how the countries are able to come together bilaterally, regionally, and globally to address these important agreements. My feeling is that we need to understand what would be, how we can pact or repact our common understanding considering the next 10 years from 2025 to 2035, okay? And this probably will be the last transition. Based on the IPCC, considerably probably we can have 1.5 Celsius degree that we reach around this. But this is not the problem. The problem is how we'll be exposed to extreme events this decade, how would you like to come together, and food production and food security and nutrition security, absolutely critical for this. So I invite you to come to Brazil. I invite you to work together with us as society. Chatham House will be there. I invite you to be ambitious and make sure that we can come in a transformative perspective, political perspective, to make sure that society can come together. If the government have difficulty, the society can come together. Let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I also want to end up on a positive note of durability, and you just reminded us of the last transition. And with that, I'm going to let me thank all of you for participating in the event. Of course, thank all our amazing speakers, but also for the online participants, thank you very much, but you don't have a drink waiting for you. For those in the room, there is a reception upstairs, and we can continue the conversation for all the good and the bad, and definitely the hopefully prospective and the deliverable. So with that, please join me in thanking all of yourself and also all our speakers as well. Please, thank you.